Israel's security cabinet is considering more options after the most significant conflict with Syria and Iran in years. Tensions suddenly escalated over the weekend after Israel intercepted an Iranian drone that had infiltrated its airspace. Israel responded by hitting several targets deep inside Syria. The Syrians fired a massive number of anti-aircraft missiles, hitting an Israeli F-16 warplane. Israel ordered a much larger strike in Syria, hitting several Iranian targets. The incident represented a dramatic escalation, as I mentioned, with Iran and Syria, and sparked talks of war in the Middle East. Joining me for some analysis on this developing story is CBN's Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell, who is in Jerusalem. And here on set with me is senior international reporter Gary Lane. Chris, let me begin with you, sir. U.S. Secretary of Defense James Mattis said today he's the highest-ranking member of the administration to make a comment since this incident happened on Saturday. He said, quote, Israel has an absolute right to defend themselves. They don't have to wait until their citizens are dying under attack before they actually address the issue. Chris, how are Israelis responding to the sudden escalation of tensions in the region?
Well, they did respond to this incident very quickly. And how Israelis are responding, George, if you went around Jerusalem, even if you went up on the Golan Heights right now, you might not know there was a big incident over the weekend. People go back to their normal life. There were no cancellations of school. We even had CBN staff up on the Golan Heights just touring. And they did hear some of the sounds of the incident, but things got back to normal. Even though people are really concerned about it, it's front page news on all the Israeli newspapers. And I think people recognize, George and Gary, that Israel may have entered a new phase in their war with Iran because of this incident.
Gary, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says his country has dealt a severe blow to the Iranian and Syrian forces. Do we have any idea what kind of military blow they sustained?
Well, I mean, a severe blow. It was a blow to some of their positions in Syria, just east of the city of Homs. They had a number of positions. I think 3 anti-aircraft positions were taken out. And then what they're saying is about another 4 positions of support, where both Russia and Iran were supporting the Iranian or the Syrian army.
Chris, to you, let me just have you expand on that. Were these significant targets? Obviously, the Israelis had calculated this, had picked out the targets, I'm sure, way in advance. How significant were these targets? And as Gary mentioned, 4 of them, my understanding, were Iranian targets. And what were those targets?
They were significant. Just to go back to how the chronological incident moved away. First of all, the drone came in. And by the way, George and Gary, Israel actually waited for the drone to come in. And it came in near Bet Shan, which is south of the Golan Heights. It had to fly over Jordanian territory. They waited because they actually wanted to seize. They did destroy much of the UAV, but they did want to get their hands on whatever technology they could that the Iranians have right now. Just to expand on what Gary said, the significance, I think, is that they're actually targeting Iranian targets. When the UAV came in, they specifically targeted the command and control center that sent the UAV. Then when Syria and Iran fired these aircraft missiles against the F-16s and downed one, that's when this big, severe retaliation by Israel took place. I think part of the significance is they hit Iranian targets. And as I said before, this could be the opening round of an open warfare between Israel and Iran.
Okay, Chris, we will get to that very point, and it's an important point we need to bring to our audience's attention. But Gary, let me go to you. What's the reaction in the capitals of Iran, Tehran, as well as in Syria, Damascus?
Well, the reaction is exactly what you'd expect in both Syria and in Tehran. The Zionist enemy, we're coming against the aggressive Zionists, and shot down one of their jet aircraft. So exactly what you'd expect. But I think, George, the more significant thing here is how did Russia react? How did the United States react? The United States stood by Israel, said Israel has a right to defend itself in its territory. And of course, this was a violation of Israeli airspace by a drone. Also, the Russians said everyone needs to back off a little bit and just calm down. It wasn't highly critical of Israel, but it seemed like they were a little more supportive of Iran and Syria in this.
Chris, to you, sir, there are reports that Israel is boosting its air defenses in the north. What kind of capabilities do they have to protect themselves?
They have a lot of capability, George, and we just got off the phone a few minutes ago with the IDF spokesperson, and they won't comment on that, but there are eyewitness reports of some of these air defenses heading to the north. They have the Iron Dome anti-missile system. They have the David Sling. They have the Arrow. They also have some of the U.S. Patriot missile batteries. So they have a robust defense there that's heading to the north. 2 points I also like to make. If in any future conflict right now, the way the IDF is looking at it, it's not going to be necessarily against Lebanon or Syria, but they're looking at it at the northern arena. Both Lebanon, which is controlled much by Hezbollah, an Iranian proxy, and Syria. So they're looking at a whole arena up there. The other thing is the point that Gary made about Russia. Really, they're a key component of this whole situation, and they really have seemed to damper it down just a bit. So it looks like right now it might be quiet for a little bit, but people are waiting for the next round.
Yeah, and to that point, Gary, are the Israelis or the Iranians ready to add fuel to this crisis?
I don't think right now. We're not seeing that right now, are we, Chris? I think there's going to be a little period of calm. But look, the big war is coming because Iran will not be satisfied until Israel is pushed into the sea. And Iran basically has Israel just about surrounded now with Hezbollah on the northern border in Lebanon, then also on the Golan Heights and in Syria. All they need after that would be Jordan. And right now, you've got the king of Jordan there is in good control of his country, but you never know what could happen. But their goal is to surround Israel, continue the pressure, keep the pressure on. And Chris, I don't think I'm mistaken on this. Do you? It seems that the Iranians want to continue to test those air defense systems in the north and along the Golan and see just how Israel is going to respond. So I see this incident over the weekend more of a test of the Israeli air defenses rather than an all-out war. But the all-out war is coming, as Chris said.
Chris, let me just jump on that with this follow-up.
I would.
Question. I'm sorry. The Israelis have been warning for some time that Iran is trying to build a land bridge from Iran to the Mediterranean Sea. Israel's ambassador to the United Nations, Danny Danon, recently warned that the Shiite crescent has reached our doorstep, referring to Iran. The Shiite crescent is alive and well. Do not let Iran turn it into a Shiite horizon. What are Iran's ambitions in the region, and can Israel stop those ambitions?
Well, the ambition right now is to build that land bridge all the way from Tehran to the Mediterranean. And as we interviewed a former IDF intelligence officer just a few weeks ago, they're really making headway into that. Lebanon basically is an Iranian satellite. Iraq is becoming more so, and then in Syria. And Danny Danon, to follow up on your comment about him, he said Syria, Iran was trying to make it the biggest military base in the world. And I would agree with what Gary said. This is really a test by the Iranians to test Israel's air defenses, how they would respond. And what they're happening right now is this land bridge is coming. And one military expert said this weekend there was two determining factors. First of all, Iran is determined to set up a military base inside Syria, and Israel is determined to stop it. So you have these two opposing forces. This was just one more test, one more round, but eventually many people say there's going to be a major conflagration or conflict between Iran with its ambitions to destroy Israel and Israel to survive and to protect the Jewish state.
George, let me add just one other thing. I think Chris would agree as well that this is also a test of Russia. Iran is testing to see how Russia is going to respond to this, if they will allow this to continue without putting pressure on Tehran and on Hezbollah, also to see how President Trump and the United States responds.
Gary, you were in Lebanon. You were stationed there for CBN News. You covered the Lebanon war. How significant is this for the Israelis to lose their first warplane since the Lebanese war?
Well, I think it's only significant propaganda-wise for the Iranians, George. Of course, they will use this. The Syrians will use it. It isn't as sure. It's the first time in 30 years that they've lost a aircraft. But I don't think it's as significant defensively for them. What is significant are how many, Chris? I mean, at least 30, maybe 50,000 missiles and rockets along their northern border. That is the significance of all of this, and how Israel will respond to that, the continued pressure on the northern border from Hezbollah and also from Iran and Syria along the Golan Heights.
Chris, I'm curious. How are the other countries in the region going to respond to Iran's continued domination and their desire to build this land bridge? I mean, are countries like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, are they going to go along with the Shiite crescent, the Shiite horizon ambitions?
Definitely not, George, and that's why you see Israel and these Sunni nations like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, and the Gulf states getting closer and closer, especially with Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states. They have no diplomatic relations with them, but you keep hearing of these private meetings going on, and the whole reason is they see a common enemy. Iran not only wants to dominate and destroy Israel, but they want to dominate the whole region. This is the Shiite-Sunni battle playing itself. It's a 1,400-year-old battle, and now we see it escalating even more. A couple of comments about the F-16 that was shot down. It is historical. It's been over 30 years since an Israeli warplane has been shot down by enemy fire. But the good news is that it actually landed in Israel. If this had landed in Syria, if you had captured Israeli pilots over there, we may be in a war right now. So that made a big difference. And also Iran, it just continues to use its proxies. It's using Syria, Hezbollah, and as one commentator said, Iran is happy to fight to the last Arab. And so they're using many of these militias, many of these other countries for their own purposes, and they're willing sometimes to step into the background, but they use their proxies to further their ambitions.
Chris, you know, you have Iran, Israel, Russia, Syria, the United States in this region. How does this conflict play into biblical prophecy?
Well, I mean, a lot of people probably look exactly at Ezekiel 38 when you see that this confederation of nations comes against Israel. We see Russia in the Middle East more than we have in any time in decades. When they came in 2015 into the Syrian civil war, it really changed the whole dynamic of the Middle East, and it put Russia right on Israel's northern border. And so when you look in light of Ezekiel and some other prophecies, you wonder if this is coming to a head, and maybe we'll see exactly how things develop.
Okay. Gary, there's a lot of talk taking place, obviously, with this latest incident over the weekend. We have stuff going on in Yemen.
Yes.
But what role can the United States play? Obviously, they've said that Israel continues to be their strong ally. Can they play a role in trying to de-escalate the situation? Or does this administration want Prime Minister Netanyahu to continue?
Well, I don't think they want the situation to continue at all. And I think on the part of the United States, President Trump and the U.S. did the right thing in saying we back Israel's right to defend itself. And it was very strong language. I think we're going to continue to see that. But beyond that, what can the U.S. do? What can the U.S. do about all this? U.S. can put pressure on Russia not to allow Iran to have free access to these bases. Russia has influence on Iran and also on, of course, the Syrian president. We need to continue to pressure them. Look, you guys in Russia want sanctions lifted. You're not really helping matters in the Middle East at all if you support what Iran is doing. So we have some leverage there. Also, there should be a clear understanding that the U.S. will provide whatever Israel needs to defend itself from this aggression. And I think those are the steps the U.S. may take in the future.
You talked about Russia's role. Prime Minister Netanyahu has been working to build a relationship with President Putin. What's he aiming for, and can he succeed with this sort of alliance?
Well, we'll have to wait and see on that, won't we? I think that's the goal, though, is to have this alliance and to dominate the region. Russia has, and Putin, they have interest in Syria. Syria's rich in oil and natural gas, and they want to control that. They don't want to see Europe get a pipeline from Syria through Turkey and into Europe, because Russia wants to dominate the oil and gas product going into Eastern Europe.
And Gary had mentioned the role of Turkey. We see what's happening in the northern corridor of Syria with this ongoing battle between Turkish troops and Syrian rebels in the Afrik area of northern Syria. So then Afrin. So you have this multiple players that are involved in the region, and it just seems like it's getting worse by the day. Is that your observation, Chris?
I would agree, George. It's very confusing. It's very conflicted between all these different parties. It's a geopolitical chess game. Netanyahu flies to Moscow seemingly on a regular basis just to make sure that that he knows what Putin knows, and that to try to deconflict Israeli warplanes flying over Syria. You have Turkey that really wants to have like a 30-kilometer border, a buffer zone along its 900-kilometer border with Syria. And right now, many of these are believers in Afrin are caught in the middle. Christians that had fled part of the war going on with ISIS and now find themselves right in the crossfire. So they certainly need our prayers. But it's a very difficult geopolitical situation here in the Middle East. But I think it's very important that the United States would take a pivotal role in being able to stand behind Israel and blunt this Iranian march towards the sea, trying to create this land bridge. I think that's very important for Israel, but also United States national interests.
Chris, you broke a story recently that folks in the mainstream media did not get. You were the first one to report on it, and it's a story of how Israel is actually helping Syrian citizens caught in this war. I mean, they're supposed to be enemies, but here Israel is reaching out, and they realize that there are thousands of Syrians who are suffering under the hands of the Bashar al-Assad regime as well as ISIS. Talk a little bit about that, and you got the exclusive story.
It's an amazing story, George. And Israel set up what's called a good neighbor policy or project several years ago when the Syrian civil war broke. And Israel was literally watching people, their neighbors, suffering because of the Syrian civil war. So what could they do? As an army, you would expect maybe they would certainly defend themselves, maybe even go and enter into the war. But what they did is that they decided to be a good neighbor. So some of the Syrians on Israel's northern border are allowed to come in. They get medical attention. They get food. They get diapers. They get baby food. They get all sorts of this things that they need just to survive. So, and also to take that to an extra step, they're actually working with a Christian ministry called Frontiers Alliance International that is sending Christian medical personnel inside Syria to help some of the rebels that are fighting the Syrian Assad regime. It's just an amazing story of Christians that are putting their lives on the line for the sake of the gospel, for the love of Jesus, and for the love of their neighbors. And the IDF is facilitating this. So it's really like a Middle East peace plan. You have Jews helping Christians, helping Muslims, and just you see transformed lives. You see Syrians that are saying, in Israeli hospitals, they're saying, I'm alive because of Israel, or they saved my leg. And I have a whole different version of what I believe about Israel after being taught for generations that Israel was the enemy. Just a small anecdote, George. When the first Syrians came over to help set up this liaison with Israel, they thought they were never coming back. They thought Israel was going to kill them. Israel gave them food to take back, and a lot of times the Syrians didn't take the food at first because they thought it was poison. And so they just realized that Israel was there to help them, to be a good neighbor, and it's really changing, saving lives and transforming hearts.
And I saw this while covering the war in Gaza during the Hamas-Israeli war, when you had Gazan citizens who were caught in the crossfire, and they would come across the border into Israel, get medical treatment. And it's not just for the region. I mean, they're doing it from Ethiopia to other African countries. Truly, this is this is a PR battle that Israel is also waging to try and change hearts and minds in that part of the world. Right, Chris?
Oh, for sure. In fact, they were doing it for years and nobody knew about it. They were keeping it quiet because they just thought it was the right thing to do. And it's only been in the last year or two when actually Israel is getting the news out, telling the world what they're doing. And as you mentioned, some of the mainstream media is really not covering it. It kind of perhaps goes across against the narrative for some anyway, that Israel is not the aggressor. Israel is really truly being a good neighbor. They're trying to be a good Samaritan.
Yeah. Gary, how do we pray for this situation? How do we encourage folks who are watching us on Facebook to pray for the Middle East and the situation?
Well, I think first and foremost, we need to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, pray for peace in that region. Everyone seems to be jockeying for position and for control in Syria as this war looked like it was winding down, but now it's heating up. You've got Turkey, you've got Russia, you've got Iran, you've got Hezbollah, and of course Iran's proxy, Bashar al-Assad. So everyone is jockeying for position to say what kind of Syria are we going to end up with after this war. But there may be another war to finally resolve that. And so we need to pray for peace. We also need to pray that our leaders make the wise and correct decisions in all of this, because it could easily escalate into a major, major conflict that no one wants to see. And also pray for the Syrian people. Millions, 7 million internally displaced or refugees, half the country in shambles. The people have suffered for a long time here. They need some relief.
Yeah, Chris, any thoughts to add to that, please?
No, those are great prayers. Pray for the Syrian people, the peace of Jerusalem, wisdom for the leaders. As Gary said, this is the geopolitical, very conflicted and confused situation, and all these leaders having their own self-interest involved. So really pray for wisdom for the leaders, and that in the midst of this, that the gospel could go forth.
Okay, terrific. Between these two gentlemen, you would think we could solve the problems in the Middle East, but alas, we are nowhere to solving the situation or coming up with answers. But you have provided fantastic analysis and a biblical perspective to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Gentlemen, thank you so much for sharing your insights on this developing story. Stay up to date with the very latest from the region by going to our website at cbnnews.com.